Every year, someone tells you the Tour de France is controlled, that nothing happens by accident, that the big teams decide what gets away and what does not. And every year, on a stage exactly like today, the race proves that nobody controls anything. And the people who think they do are the ones who end up 13 minutes behind a Norwegian nobody saw coming. So here is the question I want you to sit with before we get into what actually happened today between Carcassonne and Foix. Did Tadej Pogacar lose the yellow jersey today, or did he give it away on purpose? Because those are two completely different stories, and the answer changes everything about how you read the next 2 weeks of this race. Let me give you the facts first and then tell you what I actually think. Stage 4 was 181.9 kilometers of rolling terrain through the Carcassonne country of southern France. 4 categorized climbs spread across the stage, with the Col du Tourmalet at 1,059 meters as the final serious test, and a flat run into Foix that looked on paper like it was designed for a bunch sprint. The GC men arrived at this stage knowing it was supposed to be a rest day in disguise, a transitional stage between the first Pyrenean test at Les Angles and the genuinely brutal mountain days still to come. Pogacar had the yellow jersey. Vingegaard was on the same time. The expectation was that both teams would manage the day, let a controlled break go, and bring everything back for a sprint in Foix that would not affect the general classification at all. What happened next? No one saw coming. What actually happened was something different enough that by the time the race reached Foix, Pogacar and Vingegaard were sitting inside the peloton, watching the clock tick, 13 minutes behind a breakaway that had been allowed to go so far that catching it was no longer even a theoretical possibility. Here is how it started. In the first 25 kilometers of racing, 34 riders attacked and established themselves off the front. 34. That is not a breakaway in the normal sense of the word. That is a third of the field deciding simultaneously that today is their day and nobody in the main group having the motivation or the instruction to stop them. Among those 34 were sprinters, climbers, opportunists, and crucially, Torstein Træen of Uno X Mobility, a rider sitting 5 minutes and 6 seconds behind Pogacar on the general classification at the start of the day, which meant he was far enough back to be theoretically harmless, but close enough that if the break went far enough, the arithmetic could put him in yellow. And here is the specific tactical decision that changed this race, because it deserves more attention than it is currently getting. The best part is still ahead. 5 teams had nobody in that breakaway. 5. UAE Team Emirates, Visma Lease Bike, Decathlon CMA CGM, Red Bull Bora Hansgrohe, and Visma's Reserve. Every single team built around a general classification leader was absent from the move. That is not an accident. That is 5 sporting directors all making the same calculation in the same first 20 kilometers of a stage and deciding that their man did not need to be in that group. What that calculation missed, or chose to ignore, was the specific presence of Træen and how quickly the mathematics of his deficit could change if the gap grew large enough. The gap grew large enough. By the Col du Tourmalet at the 105-kilometer mark, the bunch was already over 11 minutes behind. The peloton was not chasing. UAE were not driving. Visma were not driving. Everyone was sitting in, waiting for someone else to decide this was their problem, and nobody decided it was their problem because technically, with a man like Pogacar sitting 7 minutes 53 seconds behind the virtual race leader, none of the top GC teams were in immediate danger of losing ground on each other. Now, I want to dwell on that heat for a moment because I think it is the invisible variable that explains a lot of the decision-making you saw from the peloton today, and that will continue to shape this race in ways that the stage profiles and gradient charts cannot fully capture. The best part is still ahead. This tour is running in conditions that are genuinely extreme, even by the standards of a race that takes place in the south of France in July. The opening Pyrenean stage yesterday peaked at 38 degrees on the road. Today was similar. The wildfire warnings that closed the final 40 kilometers of Stage 3 to spectators did not disappear overnight. The riders are burning through calories, electrolytes, and cognitive energy at a rate that compounds across days, not just within a single stage. And that compounding effect is exactly what makes a controlled day in the peloton today not just a tactical choice, but a physiological necessity for teams managing riders over 3 weeks. Every kilojoule that Pogacar or Vingegaard saves by not chasing a breakaway on a transitional stage in 40-degree heat is a kilojoule available later on Alpe d'Huez or the Tourmalet. That calculation is not glamorous, but it is the real engine of how Grand Tours are won by riders who understand their own bodies well enough to treat a stage as an investment rather than a competition. What makes today's decision interesting is whether that investment was planned before the stage started or improvised once the break was already gone. That is a question the result alone cannot answer. The stage winner emerged from that front group of 10 that crested the Montsegur together. Mads Pedersen of Lidl-Trek, the former world champion, had been in that original break all day and had survived every acceleration on every climb to arrive at the Foix sprint with legs still fast enough to beat everyone around him. He won clearly. Quinn Simmons of the same Lidl-Trek team finished second, making it a 1-2 for a squad that has had a remarkably strong opening week. Raul Garcia of Movistar was third, and Torstein Træen of Uno X Mobility finished 8th in that lead group, which was all he needed. I want to tell you about Træen for a moment because the yellow jersey sitting on his shoulders tonight is not a random event, and he is not the kind of rider who stumbles into things. Keep watching. It only gets crazier from here. He is 30 years old, Norwegian, and rides for Uno X Mobility, a team managed by Thor Hushovd, the former world champion who himself wore yellow at this race 3 times. Træen led the Vuelta a España for 4 consecutive days last season. He is a strong rouleur with enough climbing ability to survive mountain stages when the pace is controlled, and tonight he is the 4th Norwegian in Tour de France history to lead the race overall, joining Hushovd, his own team manager, on that list. That detail is not sentimental. It is the kind of thing that matters inside a small cycling nation where the sport is genuinely loved and where a yellow jersey is felt by the whole country, not just by the rider wearing it. He said after the stage that he was thinking mostly about staying cool in the heat, and that on the final climb, he just had to see if the legs were there. They were there. He also said, with a directness I appreciated, that he knows the yellow jersey will not be his forever, that the real climbers are coming, but that today was an opportunity, and he took it. That honesty is worth noting because it sits right at the center of the most interesting tactical question this stage leaves behind. But there is something else about Træen worth saying that goes beyond the result today and beyond the yellow jersey he is wearing tonight. Uno X Mobility is one of the smaller teams at this tour. They do not have the budget of UAE or Visma. They do not have a roster of former world champions or Olympic gold medalists built around a single protected leader. What they have is a group of Scandinavian riders who race with a collective intelligence that larger teams sometimes lose precisely because they have too many options and too many protected egos to manage cleanly. Today was a perfect example of that collective intelligence at work. Træen did not attack alone. He was in a group of 34, yes, but the way Uno X positioned him through the 2 final climbs, the way they protected his energy on the coudons and let him follow wheels rather than drive the pace himself through the hardest section, the way they trusted the sprint to go to Pedersen from Lidl-Trek and focused entirely on keeping Træen in the group that mattered for the general classification. All of that was execution. Clean, disciplined, unremarkable in the moment and completely correct in the result. That is what small teams do at the Tour when everything goes right. And Pogacar dropped to 4th overall, 7 minutes and 53 seconds behind Træen, the same time as Vingegaard in 5th. Evenepoel is 7th at 8 minutes and 16 seconds. Del Toro 8th at 8:17. Seixas, the 19-year-old who finished 4th at Les Angles yesterday, slipped back to 10th overall, 9 minutes and 14 seconds off the lead. For the genuine GC contenders, the story of today is essentially that the race paused. Nobody gained on anybody. The gaps between Pogacar, Vingegaard, Evenepoel, Del Toro and Seixas are almost identical to what they were this morning. The only thing that changed is the name on the yellow jersey and the size of the theoretical deficit those riders now have to close. What comes next changes everything. The first reading is that UAE made a mistake. Træen was at 5 minutes this morning. A more attentive team would have recognized that a 34-man break in that heat, on that terrain, had the potential to go further than comfortable and would have put someone in it or chased more aggressively through the peloton. The fact that Træen is now in yellow and the gap has grown to nearly 8 minutes is, on this reading, a failure of race management that a team of UAE's experience should not have allowed. The second reading is that Pogacar chose this deliberately, that knowing the heat would make this stage brutally taxing, knowing that stage 5 tomorrow is likely to go to the sprinters, and knowing that the real race does not begin until the Tourmalet and the Alps, UAE made a conscious decision to put their riders in the peloton, keep the effort controlled, save Pogacar's legs for when the road actually tilts upward for hours at a time, and hand the yellow jersey to someone who everyone in the peloton knows will not keep it past the first serious mountain stage. On this reading, losing 8 minutes today costs UAE nothing because Træen, 30 seconds ahead of his best breakaway companion, is not a threat to anyone's Tour de France ambitions. Pogacar himself was asked directly whether he let the break go deliberately. He said he decided to give up the yellow jersey to avoid pressure early on. Not that he lost it, that he gave it up. That is a man choosing his battles, not a man who got caught off guard. I find that framing interesting, and I also find it slightly too clean. The truth is probably somewhere in between. UAE certainly did not panic when the gap grew. That much is clear. But whether the decision was as calculated as Pogacar's words suggest, or whether the team found themselves in a situation that had already gone further than intended and decided retrospectively to frame it as strategy, is something only the people inside that team car actually know. And there is one more layer to this that I think gets overlooked when the conversation focuses only on UAE. Visma Lease bike also had nobody in that break. Vingegaard also let Træen go, which means either two of the most tactically sophisticated teams in professional cycling both independently made the same calculation and accepted the same outcome, or there was an unspoken understanding in the peloton today that this stage was not worth fighting over and both teams arrived at the same conclusion through the same logic. Neither of those explanations is fully satisfying. The first requires you to believe that two rival teams made an identical strategic error simultaneously. The second requires you to believe in a level of implicit coordination between rivals that the sport officially does not allow and publicly denies. What I will say is this. When the two best teams in the race both end up 13 minutes behind a breakaway on a stage that finishes on a Category 2 climb in reasonable weather, the simplest explanation is usually the right one. They both decided the yellow jersey was not worth the cost of getting it today. Whether that was wise, we will not know until the Tourmalet tells us. What I do know is that at Stage 5 tomorrow into Pau is almost certainly going to the sprinters. Tim Merlier has been waiting 4 stages for exactly this kind of finish and said so publicly. Pedersen will be there looking for a second win. The GC men will roll through. And then on Stage 6, the Col du Tourmalet arrives. The climb where Paul Seixas posted training records on a reconnaissance ride. The climb where this race stops being managed and starts being decided. Tonight, a Norwegian in a yellow jersey is doing something no Uno X rider has ever done at this race. And somewhere in the hotel behind him, Pogacar is resting and waiting, 7 minutes 53 seconds back, completely certain that the real race has not started yet. Is he right? The Tourmalet answers that question in less than 48 hours. If this caught you off guard, trust me, you don't want to miss the next one. It's on your screen right now. See you there.